And we're back. Hey everyone. I'm so happy to be talking to you guys again. I feel like this podcast has really been a real outlet for me to express all of my Go love and thoughts and reflections. I love Go, and Go is a great game that I can just kind of enjoy on its own, but I think there's a second part of my Go life where I need to interact with something or someone, or at least express my thoughts about the game in order for me to keep the ball rolling. I feel like without that side of the experience, I can easily kind of get exhausted and lose track of where I am with the game and start thinking too much about, little details and get hung up on them. And I think this podcast has really been able to allow me to give you guys an expressive outlet for my love of the game and all the experiences that I go through. So I'm really happy to be back. I hope you have been good. I've been watching some Olympic highlights, and the just tenacity of the athletes at the Olympics, the fighting spirit that they have, the determination, the amount of training that they go through, all of that always just kind of reminded me about how Go was more than just the game itself. It is a challenge for humans to overcome in many areas. Like, can you have the discipline to keep studying and improving at the game? Do you have the patience to see a game all the way through without making rash decisions? And can you pick yourself back up after very discouraging results in the game? There's so much stuff that we have to experience when we play Go, and it's beautiful, and you can just see it when you watch some big sporting event like the Olympics. All the hard work people have to put into training for these major events, and the amount of joy and ecstatic moments of victory that you see on the faces of these athletes, and a lot of disappointment and sorrow as well. It's a very human and emotional experience. I'm always thinking about Go in the back of my mind, and having all these thoughts bubble up about the game and not being able to release them out into the wild with the podcast was kind of just, it was a different mode of life for the past few weeks, but we are back. So welcome back to Starpoint, the show about Go for Go fans away from the board. And before we get into today's topic, I just want to mention Season 2. It's going to be pretty much the same as Season 1. The only change I want to take note of here is I think I'm going to de-emphasize Go News for this season. And the reason is I love Go News. I actually really liked following up with all the pro scene stuff and everything, but it actually is one of the more time-consuming parts of producing the episode, and I don't know I'm not a journalist, right? I'm not the greatest at reporting information about stuff like that. I'm not actually someone who actively follows the pro scene very closely. I keep a pulse on it, but I'm just gonna kind of have that go into the background for a bit. I'm sorry if that is one of the parts of the show that you really enjoyed. If it is, and a lot of people say that this is the part that they miss a lot, then I'll bring it back. But for now, I'm not sure where everyone stands on it. But for this season, let's put that in the back seat for a bit. I will go over some interesting news now and then that kind of catches my attention. But other than that, Starpoint will be kind of the same for this season. So let's get on to the episode. And today's episode is about Honinbo Dosaku. And the reason is I became interested in Honinbo Dosaku when I was looking at game records, and I wanted to look at pro game records that were really old, and I was trying to find some of the oldest pro game records. And now Go is very old, and it goes several thousand years back in history, but when I was looking for a consistent number of game records by any kind of ancient pro, kind of the oldest I could get to was Honinbo Dosaku. And it's not, in the scheme of the entire history of the game, it's not actually that old. He was born in the Edo period of Japan, which is, the Edo period is from 1603 to 1868. And so he was born in 1645. So considering the history of Go, that's actually recent-ish. But as far as game records go, Honinbo Dosaku's game seemed to be the kind of awakening of this, foundation of play for, he's considered the father of modern Go. Funny enough, right? He's in the 1600s, and he's known for something modern, not something. In other fields, 1600s would be ancient, right? But in Go, I guess that's the modern era. And his name was he wasn't born as Honinbo Dosaku. If you don't know, Honinbo is just a title. And Dosaku actually was a name he took on later on. He was born as Yamazaki Sanjiro in 1645. And he started playing Go at the age of 7, and he learned the game from his mother. And believe it or not, that family, the Yamazaki family, actually still has the board and stones used at the time. Imagine having an heirloom that's like 400 years old. That is insane. That's crazy. It's like you have this thing from the Middle Ages, and it's just sitting in your family. I wonder how they pass that on, like how the family branch. I guess it's probably like a first son thing. That's what I would assume. Honinbo Dosaku, legendary Go player, by the way. Maybe one of the first. He was a what's it called? Contemporary of Huang Langshi, but they never met. Huang Langshi was in China. Honinbo Dosaku is from Japan. Honinbo Dosaku, at the age of 13, went to study under the second Honinbo. Well, he wasn't Honinbo by then. So, Honinbo Dosaku, I'm calling him Honinbo Dosaku. Let's just call him Dosaku for now. Dosaku, at the age of 13, went to study under the second Honinbo, Sanetsu. And then Sanetsu died, and he became of the third Honinbo, Doetsu, eventually becoming the fourth Honinbo Dosaku. When he was under Honinbo Doetsu, he was around 15, 16, and then by the age of 20, he was basically immortal. Like you couldn't beat him, even if you went first. And back then, remember, there was no komi. Komi was a recent invention, but back then there was no komi, and so they just kind of decided who went first. And so Honinbo Dosaku, in this time when he's up and coming as a professional player, at the age of 20, basically no one could beat him, and he could even let anyone go first. Imagining that's like taking like a one stone handicap, and no one could beat him because there's no komi. And before I go on, let's do a little review of the Go houses. So to understand what Honinbo means, I'm sure you've all heard of the term Honinbo, especially if you're a Hikaru no Go fan. They mention Honinbo Shusaku a lot. And Honinbo was one of the 4 houses of Go at the time. The other houses being the Hayashi house, the Inoue house, and the Yasue house. Yasui house. Yeah, I guess it's more of a correct pronunciation, Yasui. And these 4 houses were rivals against each other, and they would often play each other and try to take titles away from each other. And it was a very good intellectual system and establishment for Go. Honinbo being considered the strongest house, and I think you can kind of see, because you don't really hear too much about the Hayashi, Inoue, or Yasui houses, but Honinbo is still a term we kind of mention very frequently in the Go world today. And so Dosaku became the 4th Honinbo. So the Honinbo house was still pretty new-ish, right? By the time he was 32. And he also became the 4th Meijin. So all these titles, it seems like it's kind of they hadn't just been created, but they're kind of fresh. So becoming the Meijin, I don't think he actually played like a tournament game to become the Meijin. It was just kind of like a title you gave to the person who kind of seemed to be the strongest player at the time. And Dosaku, when he became the fourth Meijin, there was basically no competition. No one really argued. None of the houses ever like put up anybody from their own and said, hey, like our guy could be the Meijin. No, they all kind of bowed down to Dosaku and said, yep, he's the Meijin. And fun fact, Meijin derives from a game played by the first Honinbo's Hansa, and an onlooker of the game, who was actually a warlord, a famous warlord called Oda Nobunaga. He was looking at the game and he saw Honinbo's Hansa play a brilliant move and exclaimed Meijin in appreciation of its greatness, which I think Meijin basically means like genius, like a very, high level, insightful move. And so after that, Meijin just turned into the term that described the strongest player of the day. And there was a good motivation for becoming Meijin, maybe kind of something like nowadays in modern times where certain countries, if you win a medal in the Olympics, you get certain benefits from the government. The Meijin at the time got a stipend from the government, from the Go Bureau. So you could basically just relax and play Go and be freed from everyday burdens of life, because you're basically supported by the government. And there was only one Meijin, and remember, this is just all locally Japanese system, right? There's not as much international play, and as you can see with the lack of contact with China's best player at the time, these worlds were pretty separate. And later on, when the Meijin title kind of died out, more recently in 1958, the newspaper in Japan called Yomiuri decided to start a strongest player tournament, and in 1961 that tournament's name was changed to Meijin. Okay, so enough about Meijin. Honinbo Dosaku eventually became Gosho, which is kind of like the head of Go players. Like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like the person who's in charge of like all the Go stuff, like the president of the AGA or something, maybe maybe a little more prestigious than that. And only the most talented player could serve as Gosho. So the term was typically called the Meijin Gosho. So the most talented player who is also the Gosho, Meijin Gosho. Nowadays on the AGA, you really don't have to be strong at all to be on the AGA. But back then in Japan, you had to be basically the most respected, strongest player, and then you'd be able to oversee all the professional Go players. And while he was the Meijin Gosho, he established what is now known as the Dan rank system. So he was very foundational for establishing that system. And before that, there was the Chinese 9 rank system, which is kind of a similar system, but it kind of transferred into this Dan rank system that Honinbo Dosaku laid out. The strength of Honinbo Dosaku, he was crazy. I think later on he was basically considered 13 Dan, and it only goes up to like 9 Dan, but he was considered like, they couldn't tell how strong he was. He was just too strong, and there was no one who could really match him. And he was so strong that Honinbo Dosaku, along with Honinbo Jawa and Honinbo Shusaku, are all honored as the great Go saints of ancient Japan. And Go saint is a rough translation of the term Kisei. If you've heard that term, there's a tournament called the Kisei, or the title called the Kisei, and these three are considered the Kiseis. Honinbo Dosaku also made great contributions to Go theory. If you look at the games back then, it looks very strange. You'll feel very confused in the opening because they don't match up with what we play nowadays. But after kind of going into the middle game, you see how crazy strong they are at reading. But in terms of Go theory, it was not as developed as it is now. 2-space extensions were all the rage back then, and they are still very good moves now. But we have a little bit more of a modern theory, and part of that is thanks to Dosaku, where he would do these 3-space extensions. And the 3-space extension was seen kind of as too loose because 2-space extensions were very popular because Go was a fighting game in this era. And so people would take the 2-space extensions to make themselves very sturdy, and then they would go into the middle and fight. Kind of like Sanjang Baduk, if you don't know, the Baduk that they used to play in Korea, where the stones were already laid out on, I believe, the 4th line. And so since everybody has a base already, it's just very violent, and a lot of fighting occurs. So 2-space extensions were thought as necessary to have enough sturdiness to be able to fight later on in the mid-game. But Dosaku introduced this idea of stone efficiency, where he would do a 3-space low pincer, for example, to work with the stone on the other side of that extension. This is kind of a natural concept we take for granted today, where if you have a stone that's approaching your corner, you can do a tight pincer, or you can do like a more loose pincer that synergizes better with maybe a 5-4 point on the other side, or even just a star point. You can think about that, but this wasn't really done back in Dosaku's time. And so Dosaku said, hey, I know that you're supposed to do this tight pincer here and start fighting, but I'm going to play 1 space out farther because the board is different with the situation on the other corner. So I'm going to basically say this stone is not only working with this one stone here locally, but also globally with the stone on the other corner. So this was a new idea back then. And imagine coming up with a new Go idea without AI, without any kind of, the resources that you have back then versus the resources now. I mean, consider that. And, it just kind of shows you how smart these players must have been. And another thing that Dosaku contributed to Go theory is the concept of tewari analysis. Tewari analysis, if you've never heard of it, is a type of analysis where you take the result of a given sequence and then you kind of replay it in your head in a different order of play, maybe a more familiar order of play, and see if that makes sense to you. It's kind of hard to explain, especially without a board. Maybe I can try to use an analogy. Imagine that there's a Black Friday sale, and there's a 50% sale off of a Roomba. Those little robot vacuum things that go around on the floor and vacuum your floor for you. And you're at this store with the sale, and there's only a few left, and people are grabbing them left and right, and you're like 50% off the Roomba. Oh my goodness, everyone's grabbing them. If I don't act now, I'm gonna have to quickly grab one, or if I don't act now, I'm gonna lose out on this opportunity. So you quickly grab one, and you go home and you try the thing out, and you realize it's more trouble than it's worth. It gets stuck in the way of your feet, it gets stuck in the corner, it runs out of battery, and it doesn't dock properly. Your dog is just constantly barking at it, and it doesn't, it misses the crumbs. Like, it keeps on like pushing crumbs aside, but it doesn't actually vacuum up the crumbs very well. So you decide to stop using the Roomba, and you buy a new, just normal black vacuum cleaner for another $100. And you love the new vacuum cleaner, and you get into the habit of keeping your floor clean because you just use a normal vacuum. Tewari analysis would say, okay, if I'm going to, look at what I did, all the actions I took, and if I had bought my vacuum first instead of buying the Roomba 50% off, I would have never wanted a Roomba, right? If I had just gotten my vacuum and got into the habit of actually vacuuming, I wouldn't never have bought a Roomba. And so it wouldn't make sense for me to buy a Roomba in that case because I would have already had a vacuum. But since I bought the Roomba first, now I needed to buy a vacuum afterwards because of all the problems the Roomba caused. I don't know. I feel like this analogy was better in my head than when it came out. But I hope that kind of explains it. Basically, you're just reordering the things that happened, the things that you did, and then realizing, the stones that I put down here, these are not necessary. I wasn't supposed to do this. So that's why the result is bad, because in this other sequence that makes sense as well, these stones are useless. So that's Tewari analysis. If you want to know more about it, I highly recommend researching on like Sensei's library. It's pretty good concept to know. Especially, I think less so for you, like maybe if you're like kind of a, not as high of a level, it may be hard to do Tewari analysis, but it will help to understand this concept when maybe a teacher or higher level player explains to you, hey, this stone isn't good because, and then they'll play it in a different order, and then they'll tell you, hey, because in this order, this wouldn't be good. And knowing that concept really helps understand what they're saying. One last thing that Dosaku contributed greatly to Go theory is the concept of sacrificing stones. I mean, sacrificing stones is probably not something he invented, but his style and the way he had vision over the board and was able to sacrifice stones and his greater strategy was unmatched. And more on Dosaku's strength, he was, like I said, unrivaled during this time. If you look at his records that he left behind, he never lost while playing black, and when he was playing with white, he had such a high winning rate that is just not really something you saw in the other players in the time. Some of the stronger players he played against, like Chitetsu, he continuously defeated him 6 times, and he changed the handicap again and again, eventually landing at a 2-stone advantage, giving Chitetsu a 2-stone advantage. And then against Yasui Santetsu, he won like more than 12 games in a row against him. Yasui Haruchika and Hayashi Monyu and Inoue Dosa Inseki also needed 2-stone handicaps in their games against Dosaku. He was basically just, like there was no one else. There was no one else who could challenge him, other than maybe Huang Longshi, but he was in China. They never met. And if only we had KGS back then and they could just kind of play an online game and we would see how close they would be in strength. That would be such an interesting question to answer if you had a time machine. Here are some quotes about Dosaku's strength from great players. So later on, Honinbo Jawa would say, in a 10-game match with Dosaku, due to the era's influence, new openings and strategies would make him less adaptable. Therefore, the first 10 games might end up being even. However, after he adapts, I would have no chance of winning. So this is a legendary Go player later on, Honinbo Jawa, and he's looking at this legend from the past and saying, I might be able to beat him like a few times because I know more about opening theory that has developed in the past 100 years or so. But after he learned a little bit more about those theories, I would never be able to beat him. And those are pretty, I mean, I don't know. Those are pretty strong words, I would say. Like, I feel like strong players of a certain era would just look back and say, I don't know, I think I could still beat him. If you look at Bobby Fischer in the chess world, I think he kind of says like, hey, like I have the advantage of the opening moves, or like, because we got so much theory now, I could easily defeat Capablanca or whoever or Morphy, right? And then he's pressed on to be asked like, okay, yeah, but like in terms of like your talent, in terms of without that opening theory advantage, do you think you're still better? And Bobby Fischer is still kind of like, yeah, I'm still better. So it's very different. Kobayashi Koichi says, during my professional Go career, the early study of the strategic moves of the Go Sage, he's called the Go Sage, was extremely beneficial and laid a solid foundation for me. Among the strongest players in the history of Go, the top recommendation is always Dosaku. I am amazed by his calculations every time I review his game records, and time passes by unnoticed. It's really hard to understand his calculation power because it's so high level. Like you can't, as an amateur player, you can't really look at a game and understand what calculations are being made. But one thing that does help is looking at a game reviewed by another professional who kind of breaks it down for you, like Michael Redmond. Michael Redmond is also a fan of Dosaku, and in one of his reviews of Dosaku's games, he's highlighting the amount of crazy reading that Dosaku's doing, and one thing that he says is how, I don't know exactly what strength AI that Michael Redmond was using at the time. I think he was using Katago, but he was saying how so Dosaku would make these moves and Katago would just kind of not get it. The Katago would be stumped about why those moves were played. It would not judge the moves correctly. Let me actually play you a clip of Michael Redmond speaking on this subject.
But I also noticed that he's very strong at the fighting. His tactical strength is very strong. To the extent that when I study his games with an AI, with, for instance, Katago, with most professional games, I can usually get a fairly good picture of what's going on with just a few thousand playouts. Even maybe 1,000 playouts is good enough usually to get a general idea of how the game went. But it doesn't work so well with a lot of Dosaku's games. The calculation doesn't seem to be good enough, and the computer is giving the wrong answer until I make it do more playouts. So it has to do a lot of playouts before it gets to the same conclusion that Dosaku had. And in this game also, there was a lot of cases where I found that it didn't seem to be understanding the deep calculation that Dosaku did.
So if you're not, impressed by Dosaku yet, I mean, I don't know what else to say, because it's stumping Katago, and this isn't like, the first version of AlphaGo or whatever. This is a couple years ago. Michael Redmond did this review, and I'll try to link this in the description as well. Lastly, I want to just kind of mention about some of his famous games. Two of his famous games are one on January 5th, 1684, he was defeated. It's funny because like one of his most famous games is one where he was defeated, and it's actually called his lifetime masterpiece, but he was defeated by 1 point in a 2-stone handicap game. Obviously, he is giving the handicap, and it is a game where he is, it's just, I guess it's just too, the play was too good, even though it was a loss. That it's considered a masterpiece in his archive of games. And then the second game is the 1670 Castle Go game, when his opponent opened at Tengen, which is kind of disrespectful, I guess. I don't know exactly how it was perceived then at the time, but it's a very, aggressive, mentally aggressive move. And those games were both against members of the Yasue house, and we have around 150 of his games known in record. And so Honinbo Dosaku is quite the legend of Go, and I think he's often overlooked. There's a lot of legends in Go, and it's hard to kind of give everyone their respect, but Honinbo Dosaku was clearly just the genius of his time in Go. I like Go, the game. It's great, and that's really the core of my passion for Go, but there's so much around Go that I love as well, and one of those things is being able to look back at ancient records of games and looking at how they played back then. If you are interested at all, I highly recommend trying to look up some old games and seeing how they play, and try to pay a little attention to what they're thinking about and just wonder about it. It's just fascinating to me. I think it's like kind of a little museum that you can go into and look at the world of the 1600s, for example, and just watch what they're doing and watch how they're playing and try to see if you can understand the minds of these people from centuries ago. It's just so interesting, and I highly recommend it, because it's a strange feeling too when you first look at an older game and you realize that they did not play the same way we do currently, and just trying to wonder about how and why did they make these moves, and how did they come to this. And so I really enjoy learning more about Dosaku. I'm going to continue studying his games and seeing if I can find any insights or just interesting things about him. But now it's time for the DDK Advice Corner, and advice of the day is don't overpunish. A lot of the times you'll see a Joseki move that's wrong, that you know it's wrong, and you'll be like, hey, that's not right. That's not Joseki, and I know it. Or even if it's not a Joseki move, you may find your opponent makes a move that you know is a mistake. You feel like you should get something from it, right? Your opponent makes a mistake, you should be able to get something. And so this is something that I've done where I have tried to punish my opponent for that mistake too much. And I went over aggressive into it, and I ended up still losing or being on the losing end of that exchange. When your opponent makes a mistake, don't try to force a huge profit from it. Look around, read, and see if there's any advantage you can get, but don't feel the need to make this crazy counterattack play that, shows your opponent that move is wrong. Especially even if it's like your opponent makes a move that angers you a bit, maybe even because you know that it's wrong and they shouldn't be able to get away with it. Just calm down. Don't think of your job as to punish that, and try to take care of your own stuff. Try to play Go as simply as possible. And, even if, like, let's say in mid-game fighting, your opponent makes a move that looks kind of funny, you're not going to go ahead and try to do something crazy to punish it. And so in the Joseki stage as well, don't do too much to try to gain from your opponent. So, because, you can actually wait, and being patient will reveal the mistake that your opponent makes. It takes some time sometimes for that mistake to manifest. And if you rush too quickly into punishing it, you may actually lose out on that benefit that you'll get later on. So don't over punish. Don't try to do too much to punish your opponent's mistakes, and just try to play the move that you understand. So, like I said, Go News is going to take a bit of a backseat for now, but I am still going to try to bring up certain interesting things that are happening in the Go world. And I do want to mention some pretty good news in Hawaii. This is a Chris Garlock article from the AGA website that the month of Go is July in Hawaii. And that's something that Governor Josh Green has declared, which is really cool, I think. And this is something that I've been hoping for. So the article goes, Hawaii Governor Josh Green has proclaimed the month of July the month of Go, noting that July culminates in the annual American Go Association's U.S. Go Congress, and we'll see the recognition of Hawaii's Brian Johnson as the AGF Teacher of the Year for his work founding the Honolulu Go Club with Sid Kobashigawa and his 16 years of teaching the class Buddhist philosophy and the game of Go at Punahou School to over 180 local students each year. The proclamation encourages people of the Aloha State to join us in recognizing the game of Go and Go players around the world for furthering an enriching pastime and a piece of global cultural heritage. And Chris Gorbani goes on to say, to my knowledge, that makes Hawaii the only state in the USA to have an official month for Go. And that's really cool. I think that we should have a month for Go worldwide, internationally. We should have an international month of Go, and maybe it should be July. Who knows? I feel like anything we can do to promote this game and just kind of celebrate the game that we love, I think is a good step for Go. And now it's time for listener mail. All right, let's dig into all the mail that I haven't been able to read for the past month. Sorry for the wait, y'all, if you contributed. I am going to address your mail now, and starting with Phil. Hi, Justin. I'm sure you'll be swamped with mail after your break, so split this as you see fit. You know what? I did think about splitting stuff up and editing listener mail when I first started it, but I realized, I don't know, I like reading the whole thing, so I'm going to read the whole thing, Phil. First off, thanks heaps for making the podcast. I got into it 3 weeks ago and binged up to date in that time. Hope you're refreshed and enjoying your break. My goodness, 3 weeks, and that's like 48 episodes. That's gotta be, that's like 2 episodes a day or something like that, no? Very cool that you are enjoying the podcast. And every time someone says that they binge listen to Starpoint, it kind of reassures me that, there's something entertaining about it. Like, you wouldn't binge listen to something that isn't entertaining, right? So it keeps me going. So thanks for those words. Phil says, my Go origin story. I'm only about 4 months into playing Go, but back in 2007, I was Googling the most difficult strategy board game, and invariably Go was a top result. I was interested, but I couldn't really find much about it here in Australia. Not being overly tenacious, I let my interest slip and continued on with my music production hobby. Hey, that's cool. I also like to make music, and it's cool that you're pretty fresh into the game. 4 months, I guess. After the break, it's like 5 months or so. I forget when you sent me this email, but that's very cool that the way you found Go was by Googling the most difficult strategy board game. And speaking of Australia, I did also want to mention, now that Go News is taking a backseat, I'm not doing the coverage of the pro scene as much with this podcast. I'm hoping maybe, I mean, no pressure on them, but the Pro Go Paduk Weichi podcast did an excellent job covering the pro scene. I don't know what happened. You guys are taking a break or whatever. That's great, but you are welcome back to cover that area, that spot that I'm leaving to you guys. Maybe that'll go harass them. Go tell them that, okay, don't harass them. Don't pressure them. If they don't want to do the podcast, that's fine. But that they are missed. Let's just say Shadai and Kaza are missed. I used to listen all the time. Back to Phil's email. Fast forward to 2023, I'm doing some hobby programming and looking into AI, and I come across an Oxford University lecture featuring the lead from AlphaGo, where he explains Go rules in a couple slides. It reignited my interest and then clicked for me. Oh yeah, there's probably an online server for this. You know what, I don't know if this is common, but for me too, I learned about the game and then I would be reminded of the game every now and then eventually it sparked my interest, and that's the way I got into the game as well. Reading on a few procrastinating months later, and I get into OGS and Paduk Pop, and also head into my local club to play, subsequently getting crushed. Paduk Pop, you know what? I stopped using Paduk Pop because, or at least for the online games or the correspondence games, because someone correct me if I'm wrong, please, I'm begging you. But I felt like I was playing a lot of bots. I kept on winning, and I would win in really dumb ways, and sometimes I would be losing, and if I just kept playing on, they would make this very uncharacteristic mistake and I would turn the game over, which is very AI-like, because a lot of the times AI will basically just strong-arm you, and then after a while, if you just keep playing, it'll start getting confused or bored, or I don't know why, but it'll just make a stupid mistake and it'll let you win. And I found that my opponents in Paduk Pop were like that. I don't know, I want to know your thoughts on this, and I don't want to bring this up about Paduk Pop if it's not true, so please tell me if it's not true. Continuing on, the overt complexity drew me into the game, and the fact that I suck at it keeps my interest. Well, that's not everyone's like that, so that's great. That's great for you. Getting new Go players and interest. I've managed to get a few coworkers mildly interested and playing quick games at lunch. I know that 9x9 is the standard introductory board, but after I demonstrated the rules, I found 13x13 was a good intro for my coworkers, as I feel it demonstrates a good mix of how territory and fighting work. To me, 9x9 is overly focused on fighting. I might agree with that. 9x9 is super, super concentrated to the point where it's almost like an abstract game. Whereas 13x13 is it really is like a mini Go, where it does still feel like Go, but it's just a lot less intimidating. And yeah, like I said, 9x9, it's just so close quarters that every move feels so significant and every move feels so abstract. So that actually might be a thing where 13x13 is actually maybe a better board for beginners. I have to think about that. What I would love to see for gaining further interest is having the big charismatic Go YouTubers collab with big chess tubers like the Botez sisters and Anna Kramlin. I was listening to the All Things Go podcast, and some of the interviews, I think it was Ben Kyo who wanted to try to collab with the chess creators. The chess creators are a lot bigger, right? So it's kind of hard to compete and get on their level and say hey, I'm a creator too, and collab with them. But that would that would be great if some content creator was able to, go teach Gotham Chess Go. There's this one video of Eric Rosen. He's another chess creator, and he's learning Go. And there's this video. It's like chess master learns Go for the first time, and it's so entertaining. I actually really enjoyed it. It's cool to see, like, it's always cool to see someone learn Go for the first time. I think that's always something that I'm interested in seeing. It's like watching like a baby take its first steps, and it's just like, oh, like they're learning how to like capture. That's great. That's amazing. Not to be I'm trying not to be like patronizing or anything, but like it's just nice to see someone take interest. Continuing on, what I would love to see for gaining further interest is having... Oh, sorry, I already read that part. It'd be fun to see how quickly they could pick up the strategy/tactics and play against a seasoned Go player. You know what? You actually forget how hard Go is in the beginning. I was watching someone... Oh, it was Clausius who was teaching someone how to play Go. And he's a chess guy too. I'll try to find the video and link it as well. But this chess player, he was like really into the game, and he was really trying to play. It was really entertaining. I gotta link this and show you guys. But one thing that I learned while watching was like how he struggled to see certain things that are just so obvious to someone who's been playing for a while. You forget how difficult it is to just even see those things. Because you're so focused on seeing the next thing that like it takes a while to realize, oh, how far you've come, and just notice how difficult the game is and how you have to develop these very fundamental muscles for viewing the game to even just start playing the game. And I think that you forget when you become better. Finally, Phil says, I've got a joke that I made up and thought it was adequately terrible for you to use at the end of an episode if you think it's worthy. I will share this joke at the end of this episode, Phil, and I'm glad you think my jokes are terrible, because they are, but I actually am proud of some of them. So send in your jokes if you think they're terrible. Send in your jokes if you think they're not terrible. I still have a list of jokes to say at the end of the episodes, but it will run dry probably, and I still don't know what I'm going to do the day it does. So thanks, Phil. And Phil finally leaves with, thanks again and all the best for the coming season. Thanks so much for writing in, Phil. That was a great email. I always appreciate when someone takes the time to write a long email like that. I hope the listeners also appreciate it. It's really fun. I think it's definitely like one of the surprising things about this show is when people take the time to write all this stuff about Go and all these thoughts they have. I think you guys are like me. Like, we have all these thoughts about the game, and we often keep them to ourselves because we're just playing Go. And then oftentimes you go to a tournament and you're just kind of playing the game, and you don't really get to express a lot of the conversational stuff. And there's just so much to talk about. So thanks again, Phil. Sanguinarian Phoenix writes, I just want to give credit once again where credit is due. You're credible for being able to consistently put out these podcasts and keep them so well organized and interesting. No, Sanguinarian Phoenix, you are incredible for listening and giving me those words of encouragement. I don't think my shows are particularly well organized. I'm just kind of rambling into a microphone, I think, but hey, I'll take it. Thank you so much. Janopak writes, on the bit about... Oh, this is about the episode about the Weiqi Classic. On the bit about skillful player occupies the center, and then there's Chinese, obviously, repeating the same thing. It means strong players know how to develop their potential towards the center. Weaker players hold on to tiny territories, live small and enclosed in the corner without further potential. The center is where the gods play. Thanks, Janopak, for the clarification. That actually makes sense. I've been thinking about that too. Yeah, I think intuitively it makes sense, but it's just like, I feel like it's not very common advice given nowadays to say that the center is so important. But I can kind of understand, especially with your explanation of it. I think it helps as well. So thanks, Janopak. And then M. Van Vranken says, hey, just wanted to say I love your podcast and I'm trying to catch up. I think I'm on episode 30. Anyway, just wanted to say that. Keep up the great work. Thanks for writing in, and thanks for showing your appreciation. I really appreciate it. And let me know when you catch up all the way. Neo121288 writes, Zhuo Zhuan is the Zhuo commentary of the Spring and Autumn Annals. The annals are attributed to Confucius, and the commentary is attributed to Zhuo Qiuming, a disciple of Confucius. As in many classical Chinese texts, though, the attribution of authorship is traditional but has no evidence. Both texts deal with the history of the state of Lu during the Spring and Autumn period. The Analects is a completely different text. Thanks for the clarification, Neo. Really appreciate it, guys. I need your guys' help to clarify things that I don't know about. I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. I'm just a fan, just like you. So I appreciate that. And I guess like the authorship question is with like a lot of ancient texts, even in the Western world, like Socrates, people would use his name as like a way to, almost advertise your own work. Thanks for writing in. Cantor Set writes about the OGS time changes episodes. I'm like you, absolutely prefer time settings on Fox. 5+30 is my favorite, though I still play on OGS via custom games. Would love for that to become one of the default settings. Thanks for writing in, Cantor Set. Yes, I like the faster time settings. I think I would love to try the 10 too, the 10-minute time setting. I played some 5-minute time setting Fox games during the break, and I realized there's such parts of the brain that are not used in that time setting, and there are parts of the games that are parts of the brain that are used in that time setting that you don't get to see in the longer format games. The very quick intuition judgment, particularly. We got a couple more listener mails to get into, but we'll get into those next episode. But for now, the question of the week is, what do you think of Honinbo Dosaku? Have you learned anything from him today in this episode? Do you have any thoughts on what it might be like to play in that era? Let me know your thoughts, and if you want to share your thoughts on that question or have a ghost story to share that's irrelevant to the question, or you have a question you want to ask me, you can comment on YouTube or Reddit. Or you can email me directly at starpointbaduk@gmail.com. That's starpointbaduk@gmail.com. If you are a YouTube listener, I would greatly appreciate a like and a subscribe. And if you're a podcast listener, go ahead and rate the podcast or review it. That would also help. A very special thank you to Jeffrey H. for supporting Starpoint. Thank you so much. And here is Phil's joke. Whenever I'm watching the top chess masters playing, I wonder to myself, does Hikaru know Go? I think that was adequately terrible. Thanks for listening. Keep playing Go.